The story begins in a place called 9,000 Circles of Hell, where there are a total of 9,000 levels. The weakest demons are on the first level, and the most powerful beings in the entire history of the universe live on the very last level. It is in this place that, for a long time, there has been a continuous struggle for the title of the strongest. A huge, angry yellow demon with a chain around his neck swung at one of the small islands. The red demon of small size immediately flew away from the place where he stood, dodging a blow from the yellow demon, which immediately destroyed the place he was standing on. He quickly swung at the unsuspecting demon who could not see him in the dust, and hit him right in the face, confusing him. In the same moment, without wasting time swinging for the next blow, and with enormous force, this blow sent the yellow demon flying. He flew past many stone islands, turning them into small stones and dust along the way. The red demon hovered in the air and looked at the resulting curtain of dust mixed with dirt and stones. From this curtain, the horn of a yellow demon first appeared, saying that he was a complete disappointment. Then he himself began to gradually emerge from the dusty curtain, saying that he expected something great from the 9,000th level, about which there are so many rumors. Frame made his full appearance arrogantly, concluding his speech by saying that despite everything he had heard about him, his blows were just a tickle. Pack, hovering in the air to whom Carcass was addressing, looked at him sternly, thoughtfully saying that he only knew how to scratch with his tongue. This infuriated Carcass, and with a furious cry about which of them was still scratching his tongue, he rushed toward Pack, simultaneously raising his hand to strike. The small explosion that resulted from their skirmish slowly grew, becoming stronger and covering larger and larger areas. The frame flew out of it backwards with great speed. Behind him, with great speed, Pick flew out from the same place, immediately swinging to strike, striking it directly into Frame's unprotected stomach and knocking the wind out of him. From the force of this blow, under the gaze of Pack, he flew far forward, thereby destroying all the oncoming islands into which he crashed. With a confident smile, he clasped his hands and rushed after him. Swinging with all his strength, he delivered a deafening blow right to Carcass's chin, not allowing him to recover. He struck the next blow on the stone island, leaving a huge hole at the site of the impact. Raising his head, he looked at the frame which had flown off in the other direction, and swung again. And he rushed towards him, leaving a small explosion in an even larger hole in the place where there was a small explosion. The frame, having lost consciousness, flew head down without strength. Pack was not going to leave him like that and again raised his hand to strike, which very quickly gained strength while it was still flying in the direction of Frame. From this blow, they both quickly fell into one of the islands, thereby creating a huge explosion at the point of impact. But at the sight of the fall in the clouds of dust, there was only Pack, still holding his hand clenched into a fist. Hearing some sounds, he raised his head and looked around, seeing goblins approaching from all sides, making terrible sounds. Suddenly, one of them with an eerie sound rushed right at his face. He swung and, with a furious cry that this was a cheap trick, with one blow he threw back the goblins who had approached him too close. Feeling that he could not move, he turned back with a stern expression on his face. On one side, one goblin held his wing, and one each held his arm and leg. On the other hand, his leg was held by two goblins, and his arm and wing were held by one each. Behind him, with a loud roar, Frame appeared and immediately raised his hand to strike. Unable to turn around completely, Pack, held by the goblins, turned his head in his direction. Frame dealt a crushing blow to the place where he stood, intending to finish him off with one blow. From the force of this blow, the ground near him began to crack, and large stones crumbled into small fragments. With a confident smile, he peered into the dusty curtain in front of him, already anticipating an easy victory. However, in the place where Pack had previously stood, there was no one and nothing, except the trace of his blow in lava. He raised his head and looked ahead in shock. Pack now seemed to be even more enraged than before, and now his hands were on fire. He swung his hand, saying in a gloomy voice that the jokes were over now, and without further ado, he rushed towards the frame, thereby creating a huge blast wave in the place where he stood. Frame met the rapidly approaching Palak with a retaliatory blow. Loudly shouting at Pack to die, he struck. But to his surprise, there was no one at the place where he hit. Pick seemed to have disappeared. But then a yellow demon suddenly appeared behind him. Swinging his hand full of fiery power, he said that the strongest in the 9,000 circles of hell is him, and he pierced through Frame's body, leaving a huge hole in it. Having flown through this hole, and for some time continuing to move by inertia after the impact, and then he stopped and stood on the ground, Frame's body fell heavily to the ground. But Palak didn't even turn to look, lost in his own thoughts. He thought that in these eternal battles, in the end, there would be no final winner until he showed up. Pak was trembling with fear, his eyes lowered to the floor. He, who once said that no one except him could control the 9,000 circle of hell, now bowed to his knee in horror, not daring to say a word. This was the Demon King's castle, and all the demons bowed before the throne of the great ruler and king of hell, under the control of which hell, which had been split before, became a single whole. Pak, without raising his head, mumbled the question of why he wants to return if he already has everything there is in hell. There was no answer to his question, which is why there was silence. The young man's closed eyes opened slightly, and he looked at the demon in front of him. And then even more terrifying energy began to emanate from him, which made Palak tremble even more. It was the power of the Devourer, which he knew firsthand. He absorbed all the demons he touched, destroying the 7 supreme demons, each of which had such power that he could not overcome the other. It was he who stood above all the demons, and this was his strongest ability as the king of hell. Those who bowed on one knee in front of him, and the many thousands of demons sitting in a row, shuddering from the forces emanating from the young man, began to tremble even more, realizing that he was angry. Even Pak, who did not know fear, could not help but shudder in horror. The king's voice was heard asking if he really owned absolutely everything. He raised his hand, causing Pak to flinch again, and he continued, saying that he had been stuck in this damn place for 10,000 years. Wasteland, bloody sky, and unquenchable flames. Other than this, there is nothing in the 9,000 circles of hell. Unchanging landscape and constant carnage. The guy sitting on the throne took off the helmet that was on his head. His face contorted, and he asked irritably if there was nothing else there that he could absorb. Pak, with sparkling eyes, assumed that he must be hungry and said that he had prepared a special dish for him, immediately barking at the nearby demons whatever they were throwing at them. They obeyed. The demons, following the order, brought in a giant plate covered with a lid. Pak, pointing to it, said that this was a modest gift from them to the king, which expresses their devotion, so they hoped that he would not refuse. He grabbed the handle of the lid and opened it, saying that this was the head of Pur, the last of the line of supreme demons. On a plate covered in dark, almost blue blood, lay the head of a demon. The spectacle presented by Kong Wu looked disgusting. Pak wished him bon appetit. The guy's face twisted, and he angrily threw the plate with his head at Pak, calling them stupid and saying that this is not what he wants. He hastened to apologize. Looking at the demon's head lying on the floor, he said that he did not want to eat this disgusting-looking and tasteless food. Biting his lip and clenching his hands tightly into fists, the young man stepped forward. The demons began to tremble again from the energy emanating from the guy as he tried to say something. Indignation consumed him so much that his voice began to break. Suddenly, he said that he wanted kimchi jjigae. Hearing him, the demons there began to whisper about it and repeat his words, not daring to raise their heads. Their quiet voices gradually began to become louder and louder. They repeated over and over again that kimchi jjigae is the food that the king wants. The demons took what he said literally and shouted that he wanted food filled with blood and meat. Kong Wu irritably called them idiots and said that this is not it. Pak looked at Kong Wu with eyes full of devotion, asking from whose head it should be made. He said that he just needs to say, and he will prepare everything no matter how difficult it may be. The rest of the demons supported him, and Kong Wu, covering his eyes with his hands, said in a plaintive voice that this was completely different. For demons, eating was nothing more than devouring the victorious loser. Pick recalled that he also said something about the fact that he lacks entertainment, and he said with regret that this was true, because he had killed all the strongest demons. The rest of the demons confirmed this, trembling with fear, and Kong Wu shouted that he just wanted to read a manga or a novel. Palak, annoyed, hit the ground with his fist as hard as he could. Bowing his head, he said that he was so weak that he could not please him. Bursting with tears and snot, he screamed loudly to kill him, and Kong Wu, in despair, shouted for him to at least listen to him. However, he did not stop crying, telling Kong Wu to kill him. He started by saying that at least. He returned to his throne, thoughtfully saying that if he had someone to love. One of the demons lined up stepped forward and asked if she was enough. The succubus queen Lilith walked to Kang Wu's throne. Passing by a crowd of demons admiring her beauty, she put her hand on her chest and turned to the demon king. Biting her lip irritably, she asked if Lila's heart was not enough for him. She didn't look like he had imagined. After all, a succubus that feeds on the sexual energy of other people must be at least beautiful. Her one face with 18 eyes covered everything. She was called an incredible beauty. But the sight of such beauty gave Kong-woo a headache, and he seemed frozen in his place. Meanwhile, Lilith continued dreamily, saying that she would definitely come to his bedroom tonight. Kong-woo said in horror that as a king, he orders her not to come at all, to which she mockingly replied that he was very shy. Wrapping her slippery tentacles around his hand, trembling with disgust, she asked how after this he could even call himself the Lord of Hell. Kong-woo made a pain face and tried to get out of the vile trap with a scream. The demons watching them spoke in admiration of how envious they were of him and how lucky he was. She continued to crawl towards him, trying to kiss him, and he tried with all his might to push her away. Pick, in turn, did not know what to do, so he only watched in shock. He turned away from her and covered his face with his hands, begging her to disappear. Although he believed that one should not judge by appearance and all that, but compared to her, even Pick looked cute. Kong-woo tilted his head down and covered his face with his hands, looking forward in horror. He was not one of those who look only at appearance and love, and that wasn't the problem. She did not fit human aesthetic standards in any way. Raising his hand clenched into a fist, he called on everyone in the room to be silent, and after waiting for everyone to calm down, he decisively said that he was returning to Earth. Hearing his words, Pak and Lilith became frightened and fearfully turned to the Demon King sitting on the throne, hoping to convince him. Despite the servants' desperate attempts to persuade him to stay, his decision was unshakable. Not even that, on the contrary, their beliefs gave him confidence. He spent 10,000 years in hell. The absorption of the last mighty demon bowl completed his preparations. He stood up from his throne, thinking that now the time had come, and he headed towards the exit, passing Pak and Lilith with the thought that the time had finally come to receive compensation for 10,000 years of torment. He turned around and looked at Pak and told him to prepare for this. Palak, perceiving the Lord's steadfastness, humbly lowered his head. But still, he tried to say something. Kong-woo calmly called him by name at first, and then with a terrifying aura, he gloomily asked whether he really needed to be told twice. Pick fell to his knees in fright and, lowering his head, apologized and said that they would prepare everything right away. And under the indifferent gaze, he turned to the demons, ordering them to call Amon and prepare the weapons of the great demons. The kneeling demons immediately obeyed his order. One of the demons, covered with a cloak, read some kind of spell on the stone statues of defeated demons. The place on the dais among the huge statues began to glow with white light. Pak pointed to that place and said that the preparations were completed, to which Kong-woo only replied that it was good and slowly headed in that direction. Lilith, with eyes full of tears, looked after the departing Kong-woo. Pak bowed his head in despondency because the will of the Lord was unshakable. Tears flowed from all 18 eyes of Lilith, and even Pak began to cry after. Kong-woo threw off his armor, and without turning around, he headed forward up the stairs. Suddenly, a magician turned to him, saying that if he puts all his energy into these 7 weapons, they will be able to open a portal for a while through time and space. After listening to him, Kong-woo confidently said that this was great, and going further told him to start. Kong-woo sighed softly as he thought about returning. The incomprehensible energy from Kong-woo's body began to be released. The power of the Devourer, growing over tens, hundreds, thousands of years. It can be said without exaggeration that even the 9,000th circle itself had already been absorbed by the king. This power was so great. Manhwa, a word that describes the part inside Kang-woo that contains a clot of great power, which shattered into small pieces, releasing the enormous power hidden within it, which immediately soared up to the sky under the gaze of thousands of demons. All this energy was released from the body of the guy who stood with his back to the demons and seemed not to notice that behind his back, the magician was covering his eyes with his hands from the blinding light, and he said admiringly that this was indeed Manhwa, superior dark energy. They just have to look at this beauty to understand everything. The stone statues standing in a circle were gradually illuminated by light. One of them, where the eyes should be glowed with white light. Gradually, the eyes of other statues began to glow with the same light, and the place in the middle of the statue standing in a circle shone with an even brighter and blinding light. The magician, looking at this in surprise, shouted loudly to him that all 7 weapons responded, which is why the gate opened. But the guy didn't listen to him. Looking at the opening gates, thinking about his return, he took the cape off his shoulders. Neither family nor love nor even friends were waiting for him there. But even so, it was better than being there. Instantly, a split formed in space, and a black passage appeared before his gaze, to which he immediately went, saying that he was leaving. Lilith, who had previously been silently watching the guy leave, called out to him. He stopped in surprise when he heard the sound of crying. Pick bowed his head in despondency because the will of the Lord was unshakable, and tears flowed from all 18 eyes of Lilith. She asked if he was really going to leave her. The guy didn't answer and, turning away, only told her not to cry, thinking to himself that she looked scary. He moved on. She probably misunderstood these words. Her tentacles trembled slightly, and under Pak's surprised gaze, she looked at him in love. And putting her hands to her heart, she said that these were very tender words, and it seemed to her that her heart was breaking from his love. And when she said this, one of the tentacles located next to the heart actually burst, and pus gushed out of it right under the gaze of Kong Wo, who turned at the wrong time. He looked with horror and disgust at Lilith, who said that she also wanted to go with the king. Looking at the approaching Lilith, Kong Wo hastily and without a single doubt rushed into the open portal. She rushed after him, screaming that no matter what happened, Lilith would go after him. As he moved further away from the hole, the scream gradually faded away, and an unusual feeling enveloped his consciousness. He smiled and turned in that direction, showing his middle finger to Lilith, with thoughts that let their paths never cross again. Kong Wu thought that he had been in hell for 10,000 years. He has nothing to change in the past, and he has no hopes for a bright future. He gradually approached the core, thinking only that the main thing for him was that he get to that earth, the memory of which was deposited deep in his memory. Kung Wu dropped to his feet next to the core, and with a joyful smile, he said that now he would finally return to Earth, but suddenly he was attracted by the strange sounds that the core began to make, which initially reported a kernel access error, and then it began to cover the entire space with a red laser. Don't forget to notify that the protection system is now activated. Kong Wu, finding himself completely enclosed in this dome, asked in surprise why this was happening and what was going on. A huge number of red signs immediately appeared before his eyes, warning him that he was a danger because his strength was too great. And then another alert appeared saying that all defense mechanisms had been activated and the system is in reboot mode. At the same time, the guy heard some strange sounds. This completely unnatural voice, heard from everywhere, made Kang Mu grimace. The red dome began to exude some unknown energy, which immediately hit Kong Wu with great force. He screamed from unexpected pain piercing his entire body. The colonel notified of an error, and that eliminating the defect was impossible, and the restriction started. The guy clenched his teeth from the pain that this energy caused, and he tried to squeeze his trembling hand into a fist, starting to say that it was suitable. However, his thoughts were not destined to come together. His consciousness, like everything around him, became clouded. His body was pierced by severe pain such that he could hardly move his fingers. Gathering his strength, Kung Wu, squinting in pain, opened his eyes. He looked around, wondering where he was. The sun's rays and the dense foliage of the trees indicated that he was possibly on Earth. Kung Wu took a deep breath and forced himself to sit up, grimacing again from the sharp pain spreading throughout the body. Having thought that first of all, you need to check your condition. Suddenly, a sign appeared in front of his eyes indicating that status information was being downloaded. As soon as he thought about checking his body, a blue panel appeared before his eyes. Surprised, he turned to the status window, which displayed complete information about him, his condition, and abilities. His status board looked exactly the same as it did before he went to hell. Kung Wu's face twisted. He could not understand why this was happening and why his power was sealed. Suddenly, terrifying sounds were heard behind him. Turning around and realizing where the sounds were coming from, the guy tensed. They were small green goblins, short, chest-high, young men with skin and sharp teeth of a light green hue. Without wasting any time, a crowd of nasty-looking monsters rushed towards him, screaming. But as far as Kung Wu knew, such creatures had never been found on Earth. Kung Wu gathered energy in his hand with the thought of dealing with these guys first. But with surprise, he noticed that the dark energy in his hand was weak. At the moment of battle with monsters, screaming wildly and attacking from all sides, he had no time to think, because of which he clenched his hand into a fist, thinking that then he used as something else. A moment later, the monsters cut by Kong Wo's black dagger fell to the ground. This was the ability of the demon Sabin Blades. Kung Wu's gaze was as calm as ever. He looked around at the monsters. Anger similar to the aggression of predators began to rise within the young man. One of the goblins with a terrible cry raised his hand to strike. However, Kung Wu was immediately killed by a quick blow. The system quickly notified that the EL goblin had been successfully killed. And then, about the fact that experience points have been increased, and he reached level 4. Having finished off the monsters that attacked him, or rather the goblins, he again thought about what kind of monsters they were. Kung Wu was convinced that the level had indeed increased by 3 points and energy per unit, and it wasn't just an increase in numbers. He felt his body become stronger. Once again, he silently looked at the defeated goblins. Now he needs to find out what kind of place this is. Earth or not. At least do people live here? Kung Wu extended his hand towards the dead bodies of the goblins and barely opened his mouth, activating the power of the Devourer. The dark power emanating from the young man's hands completely enveloped the dead bodies of the goblins. He remembered that with the help of their bodies he could learn something, but the information he longed to know, there was no information about this place. Suddenly, a notification appeared that the dark energy had been increased by 1. This made the guy's face appear worried. He mentally cursed, lost in thought. If there is an energy here that only exists in hell, then it probably isn't Earth at all. He grabbed his head in frustration. The reason he wanted to become the strongest in hell was the hope of one day returning to Earth. His mind flashed back to that long period of time when all he did was fight. He was torn from his thoughts by a loud sound. It was a cry coming from somewhere far away. The young man's face cleared up again, and he turned in that direction. He immediately thought that it was not the voice of a monster or a demon. Kung Wu felt this intuitively. It was definitely a human scream. Kong's body trembled. It seemed that the scream reaching his ears helped to perk up his spirit. He activated the acceleration force, a force that the demon Valor used during life. And then it passed to Kung Wu, and he rushed in the direction from which he heard the scream. For more than 10,000 years, all he had seen were tentacles and monsters with several arms and legs. It is no longer so important to him what this person looks like. If he has 2 eyes and a mouth, just don't let it have tentacles. Kong Wu rushed like an arrow, by human standards. This was an incredible speed, but for him, such speed turned out to be a burden. Once again, mentally asking that there be no tentacles, the guy thought. Although he imagined Lilith's ugly tentacles, he was focused on the energy now concentrated in his legs. With thoughts of what he had found, he looked ahead. Emerging from the dense forest, a wasteland stretched before him. And there, about a dozen goblins surrounded the girl, making her scream in horror. There, among the crowd of monsters, stood a girl. The guy began to examine her. 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, this is a person. He noticed with some surprise that there were no tentacles. These are neither festering tentacles nor bat-like wings. Not a monster covered in a bleeding cloak. This is an ordinary person. From this, Kung Wu was so delighted that he began to cry with joy. The goblins, meanwhile, had already raised their hands to kill the girl. The girl, looking at the goblins running around her, closed her eyes in horror. Feeling that there was no one around her anymore, and hearing some sounds, she opened her eyes in surprise, wanting to see what was happening. She looked straight at Kong Wu, at the guy who brutally killed a herd of more than 10 goblins in just a few seconds. Having taken the life of the goblins, the young man ran towards the surprised girl sitting on the ground. And without saying a word, he extended his hand to her. She accepted his help, and despite her wounded legs, she stood up and thanked him. Taking her hand, an electric charge seemed to run through the guy's body. He had never experienced such pleasant sensations. The sensations he was receiving now excited his consciousness. These sensations blocked out all the others, completely occupying the mind, which made him shake a little, not paying attention to the girl who seemed about to say something. She looked at Kong Wu, who was holding her but did not try to free herself, and only nodded once again as a sign of gratitude, introducing herself and saying her name was Han Sola. But noticing that he did not react in any way to what she said, continuing to purse his lips and shake, the girl said, what if he encountered any difficulties? But she didn't have time to finish her thought, because of the guy who pulled her towards him, who looked at her with burning eyes and made a sincere offer to marry him. She awkwardly tried to answer him something but could not formulate the thought properly. Having suddenly received an offer, she didn't understand either she should get angry or thank the guy. Common sense returned to Kong Wu. He quickly removed his hands and, apologizing, introduced himself with an awkward smile, saying that his name was Kung Wu, and then he asked again if her name was really Han Sola. When asked how her wound was and whether it hurt a lot, the girl answered with a smile that it didn't hurt much, but suddenly the pain from the wound caused her to cry out, and her legs, one of which was wounded, gave way. The guy immediately caught her and asked if she was okay. At that moment, a rectangular object fell out of her pocket. The guy's eyes widened in surprise at the realization of what this rectangle was. He was sure that it was a smartphone, a thing vague memories of which still remained in his memory, so this is definitely Earth. The guy put her on the ground, telling her to sit down and not strain because it was necessary to provide at least first aid. SOA belatedly thanked him. To which Kong Wu said with a smile that there was no need for thanks. The ability to communicate is proof that this is Earth. Kung Wu tore his clothes and tied the cloth around the girl's leg, remembering my time in hell. There, in order not to forget the Korean language, Kung Wu forbade the servants to use the devil's language and taught them the basics of the Korean language. He thought to himself that despite this, he was glad that he could speak Korean with a person. And then he said that she should feel better now. Lowering her eyes, the girl thanked him again for his concern, although the girl was suspicious of such kindness. The guy said with a smile that there was nothing to thank, and picking up her phone, he handed it over with the words that it was her smartphone. Suddenly, he was attracted by the numbers on the girl's phone. He thought about it without answering the words of gratitude from the girl who took him. 2023, it turns out that he ended up in the near future, and only 5 years have passed since he went to hell. He didn't make any mistakes in timing. Then, Kong Wu did not understand what could have happened to the Earth in just 5 years. So that monsters began to calmly walk through the forest. Kong Wu turned to the girl and said that, since it would be difficult for her to move, it was better to rest a little. And I thought again. Nothing was clear, so the guy turned towards Han Sol and asked what she was doing there. She replied that for some reason she had to hunt without a team. Hano continued to answer more sluggishly, looking down. She said that she was still quite a beginner but decided to go through the gate to level E, a stupid thing to do. Kong Wu's eyes shone. The words about the gate and the players meant that they were now not on Earth, but on one of the levels. He casually asked what her level was. She replied that she was new, so only 6. And in response, she asked what he was doing there. Thinking that his level was even lower, the guy belatedly replied that he had his own reasons for being there. And I thought that let her think of anything herself if she wanted. However, the girl only replied that she understood, and she accidentally touched his shoulder with her shoulder, from which she immediately shyly retreated from the guy, not understanding what had happened. Then she stood up, suggesting that they should go to the gate. Kong Wu said that she had a serious injury and asked if she would be okay. She replied that everything was fine, thanks to him, but then pain shot through her knee again, causing her to groan. Kong grabbed the staggering girl by the arm, saying that he would support her. The girl, blushing, said excitedly that it was not worth it, and she did not want to cause even more problems. The guy calmly replied that there was no need to refuse if she needed help, and he takes her where she needs to go. Han Sol tilted her head awkwardly, and her face turned red, and when asked which direction, she said that to the gate. The guy with a friendly smile said that he understood. Kongu grabbed the girl tighter, and they walked at a leisurely pace, and he was completely immersed in his thoughts. He hadn't made any mistakes, and at least it didn't raise any suspicions in her. Now it was necessary to mix with the local population. They stopped and looked up in admiration. Han Sol said that they had arrived. They approached the gate in the tree. Their height reached approximately 30 meters. Compared to the black gate from which Kung Wu came, this gate was many times larger and more powerful. Kung Wu looked back and thought, if she came here through the gate, this means that the forest with goblins definitely does not belong to Earth. And he didn't see any weapon creating this gate, and he didn't understand how they functioned. Suddenly, the girl called out to him and said that she thought she was feeling better. Kong Wu quickly removed his hand from her shoulder, and she invited him with her. They stepped into the gate, and their bodies moved through the tunnel with extraordinary ease. Kung Wu covered his face with his hands just in case. He opened his eyes, looking in surprise at the landscape in front of him, noticing that the people there had 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, and no tentacles. It seemed as if they were in a bazaar. Someone shouted that they were gathering a party on level E and they would hunt goblins. Others said with surprise and disappointment that apparently there were no tanks today. One of them asked the other if he needed a robber. He apologized but said that they did not need them. Kung Wu looked at the people gathered at the entrance to the gate and again felt a slight tingling in his chest. What he so desired was surrounded by people on all sides. He trembled again under the girl's surprised gaze. He couldn't believe that this was all for real. Now he clearly realized that he had returned. The remnants of anxiety gradually dissolved, and in its place came satisfaction and joy, which made him cry. Hano continued to look at him in surprise when suddenly her leg made itself felt again. Hano carefully called out to the guy and he turned to face her. Then she leaned over and asked if he had time. And in a guilty voice, she asked if he could come over for lunch. Kong-woo shuddered and blushed at such an unexpected proposal. Looking away, she sheepishly continued to explain, saying that she would like to thank him and maybe invite him to lunch. Kong-woo clenched his hands into fists. A strong desire spread throughout his body, and he blushed from his imagination. Kong-woo's eyes sparkled, and he said that it would be rude to refuse, so he would happily accept her invitation. Suddenly, they were called out and told to wait. At that moment, two men who were at the gate walked towards them, and one of them asked to see his player ID. At the man's request, Han Sol casually pulled out her EL-ID from her bosom, and the guy looked at them in disbelief. They also contacted him and asked him to provide documents. Kong-woo's expression changed. He tensed. He said that of course he'll show it now, and with a serious expression on his face, he reached into his pocket, immediately activating his power, the power of illusion. Thanks to her, the interlocutor's consciousness should become clouded, and he should see what was necessary. This was precisely the power of the demon Dantalion. He showed the guard his middle finger under the influence of the force. The uniformed man's gaze dimmed for a moment. He looked at him and nodded slowly. He said that the identity was confirmed. The check lasted literally a second. Kong-woo, holding back his heavy breathing, lowered his hand and, not paying attention to the strange behavior of the inspector, he suggested that Han Sol should go already. She agreed. They turned away from the inspector and walked towards Han Sol's house. Following Han Sol, they walked out to a shabby building, and she said that this was her home. Not only did her house look old, but so did everyone else in the area. When they entered the entrance, the girl turned to him and said that they didn't have an elevator, so they would have to do a little legwork. Kang quickly replied that it was nothing. He smiled happily, smelling the good old smell of a residential building. The stairs he walked along were a bit narrow, and the perilla that he touched was cold. The window was dusty. But he did not pay any attention to the discomfort, rejoicing that he really felt all this. His eyes sparkled again. Moreover, among the many regions of the earth, it is there that Seoul lives, and now a happy future awaits him. He had already imagined their future happy life together, which made me excited again. But Han Sol didn't pay any attention to him, greeting her mother with a smile as she opened the door. Gradually, Kang-woo's foggy mind began to clear up. Why did his face now express discouragement if it's her mom? Then she really just invited him to dinner. An exhausted, middle-aged woman hurried out to meet them and, taking Han Sol by the shoulders, she began to ask if everything was okay with her, and if she had found a party for herself. As she asked, the girl hesitantly, looking away from all questions, answered, "Of course." Then she looked at Kong-woo and hurriedly continued, saying that it was Kang-woo. He saved her, and so she decided to thank him. The guy bowed his head and greeted the woman, who did not immediately pay attention to him. The middle-aged woman grabbed Kang-woo's hands and bowed her head in gratitude, saying thank you. She kept thanking Kong-woo for helping Shola and saying that she doesn't even know how to repay him for his kindness. Kong-woo laughed awkwardly and asked her not to worry about it because everything was fine. The guy was warmly greeted and invited to go into the house. She asked him to go and said that their home was not the most luxurious, but she would cook him something delicious. The guy thanked the woman with a smile and went into the house, although he was sorry that they didn't have lunch together. But compared to hell, it was much better there, so he has nothing to complain about. As they walked further, the woman asked Sola to help her with cooking. Hano immediately agreed. Having warned that she would first quickly change clothes and wash herself, the girl turned her attention to the phone and asked her mother if she really wrote to her. In response, she asked not to forget to get in touch when the opportunity arises. Regardless of how she apologizes to her mother, Kong-woo remembered the cell phone and that he needed to get more information about the Earth. Therefore, he hesitantly called out to Solai. And then he continued in a calm voice, asking if he could borrow her phone because he had lost it somewhere. The girl quickly agreed, and then handed her smartphone to Kong-woo, telling him not to be shy and to feel at home. Kong-woo took the phone he was offered and quickly thanked her. He looked at the phone with admiration, and then ran his finger over it, with thoughts about how pleasant it is to swipe your finger across the screen. And it's exciting to experience the same sensations as 10,000 years ago. Putting his coat on the chair, he sat down on the next chair at the table, mentally telling himself not to be distracted because first, you need to find out more. Thinking that only 5 years had passed since he went to hell, he opened his browser and decided to start with the news for 2018. One of the first articles he came across talked about drastic changes on February 22nd, 2018. The Earth is unrecognizable. Unknown monsters emerge from hundreds of gates that have appeared throughout the Earth. Firearms are useless against them. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers were brutally killed. The United States has put forward a proposal to create a global coalition to quickly respond to emergencies. South Korea became the 9th country to join the Union. This was followed by questions about who the first players were who appeared in America, and whether the sharp increase in players across the planet was useful. Can they be considered the hope of humanity? Kong Wu, slowly looking through the articles, frowned. And then he came across the first article about this, which was dated February 22nd, 2018. He looked at it in shock. February 22nd, 2018 is the day when gates appeared all over the world, and also the day he went to hell. It turns out that he was simply pulled into one of the many gates. Come to think of it, that was probably true. Kong Wu looked for information about his gate, but on the internet, there was no detailed description of the gate in principle, just speculation. Therefore, he decided to tackle this in earnest later. Suddenly, they called out to him and said that lunch was ready. The guy put down his phone with a smile and was about to thank him for lunch, but then he faltered. The guy's eyes opened wide in disbelief. On the table, there was a large, deep pan of kimchi chiga, the aroma of which spread throughout the room. The broth bubbled seductively. The red kimchi smelled fragrant, and the piece of meat lying on top seduced the guy. Kung Wu stared at the kimchi chig. He continued to look at the pan, or rather at its contents, not even paying attention to the wish for a bon appetit. With trembling hands, he took the spoon and carried it to the pan, and then carefully, from the edge, scooped up the broth and took a piece of tofu. Not paying attention to the guy, the mother invited her daughter to eat too. She quickly agreed. But suddenly her attention was attracted by a guy who, in a trembling voice, repeated the name of the dish, syllable by syllable. With trembling hands, he slowly brought the spoon of the dish to his mouth. Mother and daughter stared in surprise at the guy in front of them. Quickly chewing one spoonful of soup, he grabbed another one and ate it just as quickly. And then he took the rice and, taking a large spoon, ate it. The young man devoured the dish prepared for him with gusto, so much so that the sound of crunching spread throughout the house, and Han Sol and her mother, sitting opposite him, were discouraged by such gluttony. But he didn't pay any attention to them, plunging into memories of how he ended up in hell 10,000 years ago. And in order to survive in this place, he had to accept dark energy. After this, he became a creature close to demons. However, due to the fact that there was still some of the man left in him, his appetite and taste, nothing he ate could satisfy him. The demons he devoured tasted terrible, but he still continued to eat them to survive. Even after this madness was repeated countless times for 10,000 years, there was only one thing that motivated him. He desperately wanted to return back to Earth. The guy was sobbing, devouring food by both cheeks. He still couldn't believe that he had actually returned to Earth. Han Sol, along with her mother, looking in shock at the sobbing guy devouring kimchi chigai, tried to call him through tears. In response, with his mouth full, he turned to her. And then, without raising his head, he began to repeat his thanks to her for the food, not forgetting to say that it was very tasty. The girl was momentarily discouraged, and then, lowering her eyes in embarrassment, she said that it was she who should thank him, and she's sorry that she can only thank him with food, but he eats with such gusto that she wonders if it's really that good. Kong Wu replied that this was true and nodded his head several times in confirmation, and then he awkwardly asked for another bowl of rice. The girl stood up and said that of course she would put it down now. Without answering his gratitude, the woman noted with a laugh that he had a good appetite. He ate the food that was offered to him with tears in his eyes, just thinking about how delicious it is and how great it is to be back. She brought a slow cooker with more food in it, continuing to look at him with affection. At that moment, the door crashed into the wall behind Kong Wu, who, unlike the others, didn't even flinch. A silhouette emerged from the cloud of resulting dust, rudely asking what the hell. When Han Sol and her mother approached, frightened, he explained his behavior by saying that something had jammed the door, and stepping on one of the fallen stones, he went inside. The young guy, swearing harshly and very angry, called Han Sol loudly. He twisted his face into a grin and stood in front of Han Sol, rudely saying that they say that she entered the gate alone without his permission. Han Sol stared at her brother with disgust. With the appearance of her brother, she began to tremble subtly, but despite this, she stuttered and tried to tell him something. A creepy grin appeared on Tae-hun's face. He asked what she wanted to say. Hanul, despite her mother's warnings, loudly shouted at him to get out and go away. And then in the same tone, she asked what he forgot in their house. She continued to speak, looking straight into the face of the discouraged guy, that she warned him not to come close, and now she is also a full-fledged player. Hearing this, Tan just started laughing loudly. Han Sol fell silent, looking at him in surprise. He gradually laughed even harder, asking if she had become a full-fledged player, and mockingly said that this was cool. And then he hit the wall with force, leaving a mark there, saying she's just a noob. He asked which player he was. The girl screamed, "Don't come closer," covering her frightened mother. The guy looked at her arrogantly, remembering how he once shook with fear, unable to do anything. And then he turned and mockingly said, "Father who died early, and mother who was good for nothing." However, Han Sol did not let him finish, furiously shouting that he is a scumbag, and how can he say that if everything is because of him? She clenched her fists even tighter and swung. Tan stopped the fist, heading towards him with a slight movement of his hand. The pain spread throughout her body, but he did not pay attention to this, and, with the words that they were going to the Andress Guild right now, he pulled her towards the exit. He pulled her, not paying attention to her attempts to get out and the words that she would not go to this landfill. "To this?" he asked with a smile, who she called trash, and he said that her brother had assembled an excellent guild. Realizing that she couldn't just get out, the girl decided to take desperate measures, and without saying a word, she grabbed the hand that was holding her with her teeth, biting it until it bled. The guy screamed and threw the girl away from him with one blow. Hano fell limply to the floor with a loud thud. Her mother immediately ran up to her in fear. Tahan, meanwhile, was pressing the bleeding wound on his hand and loudly called Sola a saw. And then, with rage in his voice, he asked if she thought that if you always did the right thing, life would become easier. And doesn't she think that the world is so simple? He looked at the women hugging each other in fear and he said that she would be a good girl and would become his property. With a pressing aura, he gloomily said, "Okay then. Since they are both players, they should at least once do everything right." Hearing this, his old mother tried to intervene and asked him to stop, not to touch Sola, and said that he would work out everything. His mother tried to call him and take his hand, but he only rudely ordered her to move away. Then he pulled his hand back and roughly pushed her to the ground, saying that she was very annoying to him. Hanol turned towards her with tears in her eyes, and then without stopping crying, she crawled to her mother and began to shake her, hoping to bring her to her senses. Tahun was not at all moved by this picture. He only said that if he said to move away, then she should have moved away. He didn't feel any remorse or anything like that, so he just asked why provoke him. Hano looked at him furiously and called him by his full name. She continued to look at the guy menacingly without ceasing to hold her mother's head. Tahun asked what a Saharis like her would do to him. After all, she is a noob, and he is the second one to awaken. He approached, and with a crazy smile said that she was not his opponent. Taking her by the face, he continued to mockingly ask what she could do. After all, she has nothing but a pretty face. She must join the Andre Guild, then his brothers will promote him. Hearing some strange sounds, he quickly fell silent and raised his head in surprise. To see Kung Woo in the living room eating kimchi ch like crazy. Gradually getting irritated again, he looked at the guy who was not paying attention to him and asked what the hell. But the young man was so focused on food that he didn't care about Taehun's indignation. Taehun threw the girl aside and irritably asked if they had a restaurant there. Having released a couple more affectionate ones, he moved towards Kang Woo, saying that he doesn't seem to understand what's happening. The guy continued to eat, not paying attention to Tahan approaching and calling him. He ate and ate blissfully, closing his eyes, not paying attention to anything. Tahan walked away from him and awkwardly scratched his neck, wondering what he would do about it. Suddenly, he lost his temper and swung at Kong Woo, who was ignoring him. But instead of hitting the guy, he overturned the table with one kick. The guy froze, not immediately realizing what exactly happened. Hano, looking at this with tears in her eyes, covered her face with her hand in horror. Tahan just looked at this irritably, not feeling any pang of conscience for what he had done. Kung Woo sat for some time with a spoon in his hand, which he never brought to his mouth, looking ahead unseeingly. Hano called him excitedly, hoping to bring him to his senses. Kong Woo suddenly screamed about his kimchi jjigae, looking at the soup spilled on the floor. And then he fell on all fours, still crying. Toon did not like such a violent reaction, and cursing loudly, he asked what it was. And he asked the clueless Hana where she even found this bastard. She, in turn, did not answer anything. Tun's face twisted, and he, still cursing, turned to the crying guy. Then he kicked him in the side and told him to stop crying and get up. Kung Woo slowly turned his head towards Toon. Fury flared within him. Facing Kung Woo's gaze, Toon unexpectedly took a step back, trying to understand what it is. His eyes frightened and deprived me of my mind. Empty and dark. They were like the deepest abyss. Toon found the right word to describe this look from the guy who was gloomily asking if he dared to spill it on Kim Chiga. It was definitely neither a man nor a beast, but a demon. He continued to look fearfully at Kang Woo, who was exuding terrifying energy, and only repeated words about his kimchi chiga. Tahan took a deep breath, bit his lip, and gathered his strength. Suddenly, the evil energy that had been in the air before evaporated. Blue flames began to sparkle on his palms, which he cued into fists because of the fire that was now on both of his fists. The temperature in the air increased so much that it seemed that the whole house would catch fire just a little longer. He looked arrogantly at the guy, thinking that he must have imagined it, and he said that he was really maswakens up. As soon as Tahan waved his hand lightly, the fire consumed the arrow flying towards his head. With a menacing expression on his face, he turned in the direction where the arrow was fired. H-Soul fired another arrow and loudly shouted at Kong Woo to run away. However, immediately her eyes opened wide in disbelief. Kung Woo, rushing past her, jerked to the side with a sharp movement and avoided the attack. A black blade appeared from the back of Kang Woo's hand, which he swung to strike. Hanul, holding a stick at arm's length, stared in shock at the picture in front of her. Tahun, focusing on the blade, rushed forward, intending to strike. At that moment, Kong Woo struck his enemy in the solar plexus with a sharp movement of his hand. From this, Tahun cursed rudely and noticed that he was not that fast. Kong Woo swung again, this time with the intended blow coming from the left. But this time Kung Woo kneed him in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. From the very beginning, the blade and this blow were nothing more than a distraction. Thinking about this, Tahun tried to quickly come to his senses. Closing his mouth and clenching his teeth until he crunched, he stood up again. Toon, continuing to speak rudely, swung at Kong Woo again. But he quickly moved out of the path of the blow and sidekicked Tahun on the back. Tahun, gritting his teeth and not paying attention to the streams of blood flowing from his nose, holding his stomach again, thought that he was not so strong. He rushed forward and grabbed Kong Woo's leg with one hand and swung the other to strike. Kong Woo, in turn, threw a quick kick to his face with his second leg, leaving him no chance to hit himself. And then, freeing his leg, he jumped to the ground. Tahun watched him irritably, not paying attention to the bruises on his face and the blood gushing from his nose. Kung Woo swung his hand with a black blade at him again. Tahun fell for the trick again, and with loud curses, his hands filled with blue fire, swung back. Kang Woo dodged the blow and kicked. This blow again knocked all the wind out of him. He could not believe that this was again a diversionary maneuver. But Kong Woo didn't stop there and punched him again. After receiving it, he collapsed on the living room floor. Tan, pale, held his stomach, not daring to look at Kong Woo, who was looking down at him with eerie energy. He couldn't figure out who this guy was. Suddenly, his face hit the floor with force. Kong Woo stepped on Tahun's head, pushing his trembling body to the floor. Tahun's attempts to rise were ultimately unsuccessful, but he was not going to just give up. Saying that he was not finished yet, Kang Woo pierced his hand with a black sword. An inhuman scream echoed throughout the house. Kong Woo knelt down right in front of his head, little by little pulling the knife out of Tahun's hand. And in a gloomy voice, he said that he would have to pay for the overturned Kim Chuch Chiga. Tahun, breathing heavily, raised his head and looked at him with hatred and asked if it was really because of Kim Chiga. It's just soup. Kung Woo lifted Tahun's head by the hair and angrily asked if he really said that it was just soup. He grabbed the guy by the hair who was trembling with horror and darkly asked if he was serious when he said that Kim Chiga was just soup. Tahun fearfully tried to justify his words, but Kang Woo did not listen to him. Again hitting his face on the floor with all his might, he began to furiously hit his face on the floor, constantly asking loudly whether he really said that about Kim Chiga. Kung Woo clenched his teeth in irritation until they crunched, and then he slowly let go of the guy's hair. He bent down to his ear and began to say that when he said once, he would say Kim Chiga, and when he says two, he will answer the blessed dish and nothing else. Tahun rested his trembling hands on the floor beneath him. He spoke once, and Tan said the word Kimiga. It seemed to Kong Woo that he was speaking quietly. He forcefully pressed the blade deeper into Tan's hand, not paying attention to his inhuman scream, and ordered him to speak louder. And he repeated the first order again. Tahun, no longer holding back tears, cleared his throat, and under Kong Woo's crazy gaze, loudly repeated his words. He repeated the second order. Unable to look into the crazy eyes of the guy looking at him, he said that this was a blessed dish. Kong Woo was not satisfied with this answer, and his expression changed to an even more creepy one. He shouted loudly at him to say the words even louder, like a believer praying to God. and like a man who cares for his girlfriend. Hano looked at the scene unfolding in surprise but didn't say a word. The guy furiously ordered her brother to speak louder and more expressively. Her brother, with tears in his eyes, tried to carry out his order, but everything was wrong for the guy. Therefore, he lost his temper even more, clenching his teeth in anger until they crunched. The desired shade K-Woo did not have. He bent down and shouted that it was too loud. He should raise his voice to the 7th octave. The guy hesitated for a second, raising his head. And then, once again with all his might, he shouted that kimchi jjigae was a holy dish. He put all his remaining strength into this cry. The guy sitting above his head finally calmed down, and everything became quiet after these words. Now Kong-woo was satisfied, and so he stood up slowly, removing the knife from his shoulder. He didn't intend to go anywhere yet, so he stood right above the guy's head and looked at him as if he were trash under his feet. When he told him that he should never again dare to neglect kimchi jjigae, Tan exhaled and sobbed. Tears and snot flowed from him, and soon it all turned into mush on his face. All he could think about was how crazy this guy was. The house finally became quiet, and no one disturbed the silence. After some time, the tables and broken furniture had already been cleaned up. All the broken furniture was put in boxes and stood at the entrance, waiting to be taken to the landfill. The mother of the girl and the guy lay unconscious on the bed, not paying attention to the fact that they were bandaging her head. Han Sol, who was doing this, looked at the woman sadly. And then she turned her head towards the kitchen. There, someone was carefully washing the dishes under high pressure of water. Pursing his lips in resentment, the guy still couldn't understand why everything was like this and why it all ended like this. Without turning to Kong-woo, who was sitting right behind him, the guy was washing the dishes and trying to figure out where his sister even found this psycho. He beat him simply because of some kimiga. Kong-woo didn't pay any attention to him, calmly sipping his drink from a cup and gradually scrolling through something on his phone. Suddenly, tears poured out of Tahan's eyes. He still felt sorry for himself and considered Kang-woo Kim Chigs a crazy son of a Onasakyo. As he washed the dishes, he continued to think in anger and frustration about what he had done to deserve this in the first place. Turning around and looking furiously at Kong-woo, he asked himself why he had to endure this at all. However, as soon as Kung-woo placed the cup of drink on the table with a knock, Tahan jumped and hiccuped in fear and returned to his work. Kung-woo, without looking in his direction, indifferently asked if he thought Kung-woo was crazy if he reacts like this only because of some kimchi jjigae. The guy answered fearfully that he didn't think so. Then Kong-woo looked at him with red eyes, recognizing lies in his words but did not comment on it. Instead, telling the scared guy that he can dress nicely, sleep a lot, eat deliciously and relax comfortably, do what he likes and not what will help him survive, but he is not able to appreciate what he has. In an instructive tone, he told Tahan to learn to appreciate what he has. I thought to myself that he was just a vain... The guy responded loudly and said that he understood him, and he turned to the sink, thinking to himself that he would regret getting involved with him. All the same, as soon as he reports this to Andras, he will quickly be dealt with. Suddenly, for the guy Kung-woo called out to him again, ordering him to come to him if he finished washing the dishes. Then Kong-woo himself stood up, leaning on the table, saying that he thought that he would not get any benefit if he saved Tahan's life. The guy listened in fear to Kung-woo's words about how he doesn't understand that if you only do the right thing, life won't get any easier. Kung-woo came closer and grabbed the guy by the collar of his t-shirt, and looking into his eyes, he told him not to worry because he would not die. He had no pity for Tahun, but even though murder was already in his blood, he didn't want it now. But his eyes became even creepier when he grinned and said that he thought that for him, death would be a more desirable outcome. Toon stopped making any sounds and now powerlessly watched what was happening in front of him. Kang-woo activated the power of the demon Ouroboros, the power of fear. The person to whom this power of Ouroboros is applied has fear in his soul, and he turns into a puppet who will not even think about resisting this monster. He grabbed the struggling guy in his arms. Taehyun looked straight into the monster's eyes and begged him not to touch him, but he didn't seem to listen to him, and vice versa. He did not take his red, huge eyes off him. Taehyun's heartbreaking voice indicated that he no longer had the strength, but he still tried to resist. Tahun wet his pants and looked at Kong-woo like he was crazy. The guy grinned ominously, looking at Tahun, and told him not to tell anyone what happened there. Kong-woo looked at him gloomily, and without a hint of a smile, ordered him to get out and try not to catch his eye. Kong-woo sat down on a chair and waved his hand lazily. The guy was at his mercy, even under torture. He will not tell anyone about anything, Tan, looking completely broken, staggered out. Hano, who saw him come out, silently glanced towards Kong Wu and thought that this was the second time Kong Wu saved her. He saved her from Tahun, who tormented her for several years. She didn't know how she could thank Kong Wu. The guy, meanwhile, did not pay any attention to her, his head buried in the phone. He calmly flipped through the feed and sometimes clicked his finger on the screen. Suddenly, he remembered what Tahun told him and realized that what really bothered him was the fact that he was a makor beggar. With these thoughts and thoughts that he needed to find a job because he needed money, he began scrolling through the feed twice as aggressively, not paying attention to the girl looking at him like a deity. Suddenly, he was surprised to notice something interesting. It was an article about a magic stone, which said that this is a stone enclosed inside a monster and is a powerful source of energy. The darker the stone, the higher its price. Kong Wu turned to the girl and called her name. She happily responded immediately. The guy asked if she had a magic stone and if he could look at it. The girl replied, "Of course you can," and began rummaging through her bag. Taking out the stone, she handed it into the guy's hands, saying that it was an EL magic stone obtained from the goblin hunting grounds. Kong Wu took her level E mask and thought about the article from the internet. It said that the darker the stone, the higher the level of its owner. Kong Wu, holding the EGR stone in his hands, closed his eyes. He focused on reading the information inside the stone. Suddenly, he realized that he did not feel dark magic in him. He opened his eyes thinking that there was something in the stone, but it was different. The guy remembered the moment when he devoured the energy of goblins. Although weak, the bodies of goblins contained dark energy. He expected that the origins of goblins and magic stones were the same, and that the stones would also contain dark magic. But he was mistaken. These stones contained a different energy. It wasn't that it was dark magic, but rather normal magic, another energy. Kong Wu thought about it. He didn't understand where it came from, having recently used the Devour power. He could not even think that monsters have dark energy and did not specify at that moment where they get it from. But now it is too late. Thinking that this was no longer important, he returned the stone back to the girl with a smile, not forgetting to thank her. What was more important to him now was how to start making money selling these things. He remembered what happened the day before and realized what he needed to do to achieve his goals. And then he turned to Kong Sol, asking if there was a players' association nearby. She answered in surprise that there were definitely no such people nearby, but there was a headquarters at Seoul Station. And she quickly told the guy, getting up from his chair, that she also needed to go there, not forgetting to offer to go together. In response to his surprised question about why she also needed to go there, she looked back at her mother and explained that in fact, their state of affairs was not very good. Looking at the stone in her hand, she continued to say that she realized that she lacked skills. Even if it took time, she would like to learn before the next trip to the gate. Then she looked up at Kong Wu and said that it was only thanks to him that she understood all this and thanked him again. The guy once again replied that this was not worth thanks. To her words that she also wants to help people like him, the guy just smiled. Han Sol, meanwhile, continued to talk about learning the basics, focusing on the second awakening. The guy replied that he hoped everything would work out for her, and asked when they were moving out. Hanol said that now she will get ready and can go. The guy thought while he was waiting for her. For 10,000 years he saw demons and then he met an angel. But for now, he does not plan to help Sol perhaps later. Now, given her skills, there will be many times more harm than good. It's cruel, but it's necessary, and it's reality. He needs to get rid of the ballast that is pulling him down and regain his strength as quickly as possible. In hell, full of strong demons, he was a weak person at the very bottom. To survive in a place like this, he had to become calculating. Of course, over time, the number of demons devoured increased, and he began to be respected, but the habits do not disappear. First of all, he needed his strength back. Han Sol came up from behind and scared the guy standing by the window by asking if he had an ID card. And when I didn't hear anything in response, I suggested that we first look into the administration. He looked a little sadly at the new ID, standing in the transport next to Han Sol. He thought that this was his new ID. Before going to the player support center, Kong Wu went to the district administration to get an ID card. And when he was given it, he asked the employee if that was all. She replied that that was all, and asked if he had any questions. He answered with an awkward smile that there were no questions, and he apologized for the trouble. He looked at the ID with a sad expression on his face. How lonely he was. How sad a life he led that no one even reported him missing. No one simply knew that he had disappeared. He disappeared from Earth for 5 years, time passed as usual, and he was not listed as missing, No one during this time, no one reported him as missing. Nobody knew what happened to him and what he had to go through all those years. From his thoughts and memories, he was pulled out by a female voice calling his name. Seeing that she had caught his attention, Han Sol, friendly, suggested that he look out the window and look at the scenery. Kung Wu obediently turned his head towards the window. Kung Wu made an admiring sound. The place where Han Sol lives can hardly be called a city, but this place is radically different. The girl, hearing his exclamation, asked if it was cool, and she informed him that she really liked the view from there. Kong Wu agreed with her while putting the ID card in his pocket. For himself, he decided that from now on, everything would be different. He had no thoughts of returning to the old way of life, having lived like a dog for 10,000 years. Finally turning his attention to the girl, he once again said that this was all really cool. The dispatcher announced the arrival of their vehicle at the Players Association station, and just in case repeated several times that the exit was on the left. When they came out, the girl immediately called him, indicating which way they should go. Kong Wu let out a delighted exclamation. He looked at the huge masses of people moving around the station, and then Kong Wu looked in the direction Han Sol pointed. He looked at the place called the Player Support Center in shock. It seemed to him much larger than the Aina International Airport building. It is incredible that they built a building of such size in the very center of the city. It's scary to even imagine how much money was invested in this, Han Sol called out to him, taking something out of her bag, saying that she had something special for him. This something turned out to be a phone handed to him, which the girl said was her old phone. The association has Wei, so she will contact him later. For the guy at that moment, she seemed something akin to an angel. He thanked her with reverence. After finishing this, Han Sol turned around and said that in that case, she will go to the basic level classes. Kong Wu replied that he would go too, then, and would call her when he was done. Saying that she would probably be a little late, the girl, a little shyly, invited him to have dinner together. The guy happily agreed and, saying that this was a great idea, asked her to be careful. After parting with Han Sol, Kong Wu entered the department building. He immediately thought that he had serious dimensions. He looked around and at people, trying to understand whether the players had really become so significant to society. Well, this is possible if they are considered rescuers. Suddenly his gaze fell on the machine, which notified that in order to pass identification, you need to insert your ID into it. The guy thought that it was possible with the help of this device he needed to get a coupon. The machine repeated its words once again before Kong Wu inserted his ID card into it, and the recognition process began. After a couple of seconds, the machine notified that the process was completed, his identity was confirmed, and he was 18th in line, and then she gave me a ticket and told me to take it. The guy looked in surprise at the coupon in the machine, which repeated the need for him to take the coupon and proceed to the testing room. The talent in his hands trembled violently, which surprised him even more. Suddenly, a light appeared under his feet, and the machine repeated its cue once again. Kong Wu took the ticket handed to him and headed in the right direction. There were several very excited guys sitting in front of the testing room. Someone talked to each other about what skills they had acquired and what they hoped for in the future. Kong Wu did not pay attention to their conversations. Sitting on the sofa with his back to them, one of the men said that even if he reaches level B, he is worth nothing in comparison with players like Baek Kangan and Cha Young. They are said to have been at S level when they reached rank 1. Of course, they cannot be compared with them. Kong Wu quickly typed something on his phone, finally listening to their conversation. From it, he understood that the level of a special skill was very important. Actually, the player's class is determined by the level of a special skill. One of the men summed it up, saying that, how can they even compare themselves with those who received the rank and became the master of the largest guild? If you get level C, you can be invited to one of the 5 great guilds, but I can't even dream of that. Maybe someday later. The guy read the articles and thought about it. 5 great guilds: Kim Jae-hun from Mir, Cha Youngju from Red Rose, Baek Kangan from Hanwell, Chen Hunu and Sonari, and Chaman Huk from Minori. All 5 of the strongest players founded their guilds in Korea. When he regains his strength, it will be a matter of time before he meets them. The stronger you become, the more enemies you have, there is a high probability that he may have a conflict with them. The most important thing for him is that he needs to restore his strength as soon as possible, and the rest can wait. If you click on the player property, the status window will open, so you can check the special skill. Maybe he can become stronger than before. The feature of the S level above it is the SS level. How strong the SS level is, Kong Wu could not even imagine, but nothing can compare with the Devour strength. Kong-woo was called by number, saying that he could enter the office. Kong-woo followed the voice that called him to the testing room. There were a huge number of people inside, and the woman who walked towards him asked him to come and sit at the table to which she pointed. There is a snow-white lens installed there. The players put their hands on it and were very worried. Another woman sitting at the table asked if he was Kong-woo. He replied that everything was correct. Then the woman showed him the ball closer and told him to put his hand on it, explaining that when this ball caught his power, the stone would turn into the color of his level. The higher the level, the darker the shade. The guy extended his hand, thinking that it would not be very good to stand out. What to do if he turns out to be too strong? Without hesitation, he placed his hands on the stone, which immediately began to glow a little. And then it began to blow with a bright white light that blinded his eyes. Kong-woo closed his eyes, thinking that this was perhaps even too bright. The girl just sat there without words, watching this bright light. And when it stopped, she looked at the ball without much enthusiasm. The woman said in a casual voice that he had normal F-level strength and could remove his hand. She looked at the stone, which had hardly changed its color, and wrote something down on a piece of paper she was holding in her hands. The guy opened his eyes in shock, not believing what he heard. The woman told him that she would tell him what is best worth paying attention to. As a player with a level below D, he knows that his power is sealed. Kong-woo shook his head as the result was very different from what he expected. All the same, level F is somehow completely sad. The woman, meanwhile, explained that first he receives an E-level player ID. You can freely enter the E-level gate. To visit a higher level gate, you must write a statement of acceptance of responsibility and provide a statement of a guardian. Kong-woo still had hope that perhaps he was so strong that the stone simply could not measure his strength. Hearing about the guardian, he ironically thought that Pak would have flown into a rage if he had heard this. But still, it was an injury earned over 10,000 years. He no longer distracted by such thoughts, asked how he could increase the level. The girl said that if he passed the basic training, he would immediately get a D level. Also, the level can be increased with a certain number of magic stones. The guy heard this and immediately thought that he liked this method better. Then he got up from the table, saying that he understood everything. The girl told him to go to the counter and wait a little while they prepared his player ID. She was about to say what she needed to do to sign up for basic training when Kong-woo interrupted her and said that this was not necessary. He had no intention of getting basic knowledge. The girl immediately fell silent, thinking that the guy must be upset that his level was so low. But if he doesn't go through training, he won't last even a minute in the gates. The girl returned to work with the thought that it is better not to become player if you have received level F. His stone, lying on the table, suddenly began to darken from snow white to gray, from gray to dark gray. The girl's gaze fell on the stone from which Kong-woo had just left. She could not understand what was happening to it. The most logical assumption as to why the color began to change so quickly from snow white to almost black was that it apparently broke. She thought that it couldn't be any other way because that person had an F rank, but when she reached out her hand and touched the stone, it suddenly cracked and split. The woman simply looked at the fragments with hopelessness. He can't have such a black special ability. Even the last time Baek Kong-hun got S level, he only had dark gray. And here, it's not dark gray but real black. This has never happened before. She screamed loudly for the broken ball to be replaced with a new one. A huge number of people have gathered around the level E gate near Seoul, looking for a party in turmoil. Someone kept coming up and asking if they needed a robber on the team, but he was always turned down. Kong-woo, who had heard a similar conversation before, thought a little about what was wrong with the robbers, but apparently everyone has a certain order in which the party is recruited. However, he immediately decided that he didn't care. As someone who was going to hunt on his own, he did not care at all about the chatter around him. Kong-woo handed the employee the player ID he had just received. He looked at him, confirmed his level, and passed on, entering the gate after passing through it. Kong-woo's first plan was to go into the forest to hunt monsters. Having passed through the portal, he leaned down tiredly and said that here he was. He was afraid that he might end up in hell again, but he still doesn't like this method of movement because it causes unpleasant sensations. He stood up and stood to his full height, saying that he would probably look for monsters. A huge back grew behind him, and the man turned to him. He turned towards the source of the sound, and he saw the shield with which the young man was hiding, and apparently his party, on the young man's back. The young man was over 2 meters tall, and his body consisted entirely of cubes. Kong-woo thought it was a bear. It was a coincidence, but no, it was definitely a man, but he looked like a predatory animal. He looked gloomily at the guy standing above him with disbelief. silently wondering what he wanted. But to his question about whether he was going to hunt alone, the guy honestly answered that he was. When asked if he was increasing his rank, the guy replied that maybe. People from his party approached the guy, saying that they were ready, and they gasped when he answered no and went on to talk with the guy. He clearly had power in the party. Everyone immediately fell silent, and a shiver ran through the body of each of them. Meanwhile, he said that it seemed that the guy has not even completed training yet. And if this is the case, then it is best not to hunt alone. Not paying attention to the guy's mood, he told him that if he had not yet found a party, then he should join and go with them. His entire team was immediately outraged by his words, asking why he even decides for them. And in principle, he would not be of any use to the team. Then the big man turned to them and shouted that he was saving a man's life. They can save a person's life, but if they don't care, then they won't receive magic stones at all, so let him go with them. Kong Wu thought that the big guy was actually a good person, but he still had to refuse, which is what he did, saying that he didn't need a party. However, the big man didn't listen to him. He said that since consent had been received, he could introduce himself, and he took his hand and shook it, saying that his name was Kong Tai-su. Then, with a friendly smile, he asked what the guy's name was. He calmly replied that his name was Kong Wu, and after thanking him for his kindness, he tried once again to refuse to accompany him. But that was not the case. He was interrupted by Kai's laughter. He said with a smile that Kong Wu could address him as you, since he is only 24. The guy looked at him in shock, of course. If you hear this from a big guy who definitely looks like he's in his 30s, you might think it's a lie. The guy shouted, saying that he was simply born in the early 2000s and smiled, showing his ID. This has happened before more than once. Kong Wu chuckled and shook his head, saying that, in this case, okay, they would communicate on a first-name basis. Then he turned to the surprisingly silent guy by name, with words of gratitude for what he offered, but assured him that everything would be fine with him. He weighed everything and thought it over. The guys from the party, meanwhile, watched them in surprise. Tai-su became sad in response to the harsh answer and spat. But still, scratching his head, he replied that if he had decided so, then nothing could be done. However, he warned him to be careful. He should especially be wary of the healthy brown goblins. If he sees them, let him run. Hobgoblin is the boss. These goblins are very different from others in both appearance and size. Once again, thinking that he was definitely a good guy, Kong Wu sincerely thanked him for his concern and advice. Tai-su and the party said goodbye to him and retreated back, hiding in the forest. The guy waved back, and he began to watch them hide in the forest, thinking that if he really was still green, he would go with them. After watching them go, he turned in the other direction, thinking that despite all this, he was still working alone. Saying that it was time to hit the road, he walked with an even lighter gait deeper into the forest. Having activated the movement, he quickly found himself in the place he needed. Walking through the forest, he noticed the footprint of a goblin, or rather traces. There were a lot of them. They were definitely somewhere nearby. Noticing a clearing where they were walking without noticing him, the guy rejoiced at having found them. Then, with a loud cry that, here they were, he jumped straight into the clearing where this huge crowd stood. Shouting bingo, he used a black knife to kill one goblin first. He screamed, more precisely. It turned out that there were 5 of them, and they all screamed at once. Kong Wu rushed towards the goblins with the precision and agility of a wild beast. Dark energy flowed into Kong Wu's left hand, and a black blade appeared from his left wrist. He immediately began to cut through the rest of the goblins. He couldn't figure out if he'd really hit a big jackpot when he got into the clearing with those goblins. They were hostile, judging by the sticks in their hands. But the guy didn't pay attention to this. Pointing his blade towards the goblins, he finally offered to start. The goblins rushed towards him in a crowd, loudly screaming. The goblins who approached faster than the others swung at the calm guy with a homemade weapon. Before that, he chopped up 10 people at once, but now there are only 5. He didn't even waste any effort. With a few movements, he cut off their necks, and the heads of the creatures fell from their shoulders. Kong Wu cut down and removed the goblins who came too close to him. Although they tried with all their might to get him and kill him because of his speed, it seemed an impossible task. He had a feeling of lightness in his soul as he quickly ran between the approaching goblins and cut them with his knife. His eyes expressed nothing but stern concentration. Kong Wu did not pay any attention to the corpses that he left behind him. The surviving goblins tried to oppose him with something and somehow resist him. However, they immediately found themselves cut in two without even having time to do anything in response. Their fate did nothing to stop the living goblins, who did the same. And just like that, they ended up killed by the guy's quick blows. He brandished a knife, cutting off the heads of everyone who was in his path. not really paying attention to how carefully he does it. He fought off attacks and killed everyone who came too close to him, and gradually his gaze became too crazy. Even after everything that happened, there were too many goblins left. But now they were not eager to fight but stood and trembled, looking at the guy in fear. Goblin blood was running down Kong Wu's knife in hand, but he didn't pay attention to it, looking at the crowd in front of him. Seeing their number, Kong Wu happily said that in this case, since there were no fewer of them, he would finally eat to his fill. Then he clenched his hand with the knife into a fist, preparing to attack the rest. After a while, he hid the knife back in his hand, and with a heavy sigh, he wiped the sweat from his face, wearily saying that he had finally killed everyone. It was quite difficult because of their number. The entire clearing in front of the guy, strewn with the corpses of goblins, was confirmation of this. Suddenly, Kong Wu was surprised to see a notification appear stating that he had successfully destroyed the level E monster. His level had moved to 4, and his dark energy had increased by 1. Kong Wu opened the status window and, after looking at it again, noticed that he could pump up dark energy, increasing its level. He walked over and laid his hand on one of the corpses. As soon as he approached the bodies and touched them, the power of the Devourer awoke. He said that he already knew that magic stones do not contain dark energy. The black mist that rose from his body completely enveloped the goblins. There was a terrifying sound of breaking bones and tearing flesh. Kong Wu smoothly closed his eyes to determine where the dark energy was coming from, and he definitely felt it. It didn't take much time to search. He definitely sensed the source. Its source was definitely not magic stones, he felt it inside their bodies. Or more precisely, the soul located in the body. Every killed body had a soul. The amount of dark energy depends on the time of death of the monster. This means that the faster the body is absorbed after death, the more dark energy can be obtained. The guy smiled at his thoughts. It was just great. If he continues like this, he will be able to sell stones and receive dark energy. And all this could not but please him greatly. After draining all the energy from them, Kong Wu picked up one E-level stone and put it in his bag, saying that all that remains is to collect the crystals and move on. He collected crystals and wondered out loud that if he sold all these stones, how much chicken would he be able to order? If you think about it, now these bones look like he ate chicken and left only the bones. All his thoughts about food now gave him an appetite, and he said that as soon as he gets out of there, he will have to go somewhere to eat. Thinking about this, he immediately remembered Han Sol and thought about her, realizing that he would need to take her with him. He was already imagining this picture, which made his mouth water. In order to somehow ward off the desire to eat, Kong Wu shook his head and, with a loud cry that Han Sol should wait a little and he would take all kinds of chicken, quickly began to collect stones from the ground. Suddenly, a loud, terrifying sound was heard from behind him. Kong Wu squinted, and since the sounds were different from those made by the goblins, he turned to the source of the noise. Then he turned completely in that direction. A green, healthy goblin stood between the trees. Compared to ordinary goblins, which were about 1.5 meters tall, this one was huge, about 2 meters in height. Kong Wu remembered Tai Su's warning. He began to approach with a loud sound. While still looking at Kong Wu, the goblin with red eyes growled. In the clearing in front of him stood Kong Wu with a sack, surrounded by bones and broken weapons. The hobgoblin, seeing that his hideout was destroyed, rushed towards Kong Wu with a roar. Looking at him, the guy thought with fear that he was using real magic. In his hands, unlike simple goblins with their crooked swords, he had a real dagger. The power in the hobgoblin's dagger was maintained by a small amount of magic. For Kong Wu, it was a surprise that monsters could use magic. Kong Wu raised his hand and took out his blade to engage the hobgoblin, because in his opinion, when it comes to permissive power, his dark magic is superior to this magic. The goblin, meanwhile, swung his dagger at him with a loud roar and, without ceasing to scream, struck. Kong Wu dodged this blow, which left a huge hole in the ground. The hobgoblin screamed again and, overcome with anger, rushed at the guy. Kong Wu raised his left hand and raised his blade to block the hobgoblin's attack, but with a sound like an explosion, he flew back. It was difficult to cover from the front. The reason why he was thrown away was the elementary difference in the structure of their bodies, namely the presence of muscles. The goblin rushed after him, yelling again. Kong Wu was intrigued by the battle. He wasn't surprised that he was thrown back. The battles in which the advantage was on his side can be counted on one hand. The guy stopped right in front of the similarly stopped goblin, in order to hold the sword with which he swung at him. The guy already put up 2 blades, holding the sword in the air with trembling hands. Kong Wu was only annoyed that they were in different weight categories because that was the main problem. He clenched his teeth forcefully, deciding what he needed to do, and he swung, hitting the huge monster with one of the knives and wounding him. The goblin growled even stronger than before, and he was met with another blow by the protection on his shoulder armor. Noticing that the blow did not cause any harm to the goblin, Kong Wu thought with annoyance that, due to his characteristics, he could not break through his defense. He jumped back in surprise from the monster's next attack, barely avoiding it. Jumping in front of him, Kong Wu thought that he must definitely find his weak spot. Then he quickly jumped away from another of his blows, stopping to think about it. He dodged, slipping under the blade of the third blow. He jumped away from the quickly approaching kick, and then he slipped under the blade again, dodging another blow. The goblin knelt down in front of the once again evading guy, and hit the place where he had bounced off again. Slowing down, Kong Wu thought about it. The goblin uses his size very well. This boss was definitely different from the goblins he had killed recently. The guy looked at him sternly, and he jumped back from another blow. He stopped far from the goblin, holding the stones with his hands. Whatever one may say, his territory was destroyed, and his subordinates were killed. Running past the goblin, the guy looked into his eyes with a smile and said that he was his prey. The goblin turned in his direction but was distracted by something he threw behind him. It was one of the goblin heads that he had sucked all the dark energy from. Realizing this, the goblin fell into a rage again. Looking at the naked hobgoblin, blinded by rage, Kong Wu smiled, saying that this should be enough. He deftly dodged the monster's attack and then lunged himself. The power of rage, a power possessed by a demon named Kokol used this power to make himself furious, thereby giving himself more power. Kong Wu was going to use this power not on himself but on the hobgoblin. Then the hobgoblin's movements would become even faster, and the power embedded in the dagger would increase. When he touched it, the goblin screamed furiously. His powers really increased, and he rushed towards Kong Wu using most of them. Kong Wu smiled because he now knew what the hobgoblin would do and how he would behave next. The goblin swung his sword again. Kong Wu slipped under him again and avoided the blow. Then the goblin got angry and demolished the trees behind the guy's back but could not reach him. He stared at the guy and swung again. Kong Wu looked with an icy gaze at the hobgoblin rushing towards him, who had already been affected by the power, causing him to go crazy with anger. This power allows you to strengthen the target several times like a buff. But still, there was one thing. In fact, having used this power, all thoughts are overshadowed by anger, and movements become chaotic and uncomplicated. Therefore, the goblin now struck randomly left and right. Unable to catch the guy, he became increasingly irritated, and his movements increasingly lost all common sense. Letting out a terrible roar, the goblin swung his dagger. Now that the hobgoblin had completely lost his sanity, he was like an open book to Kong Wu. In fact, it was a curse that made it very easy to lose your mind. This would make it much easier for him to dodge. Kong Wu swung his hand to hit him with a smile. Kong Wu, arching, avoided a blow to the lower back and then plunged the knife into the hobgoblin's knee. He screamed as if he were beside himself and fell to the ground. The guy took out a black blade from his other hand. However, the goblin was not going to give up so easily and swung again to hit him. Kong Wu was not going to give in to him until he realized that it was not him who had stabbed him. He quickly cut his throat with a black blade. The goblin, with its throat cut, made several more lunges, but eventually he stopped moving. Clicking his tongue, Kong Wu looked at the monster's body, not forgetting to say that it was just a complete disappointment. If this had happened earlier, he would have dealt with them in no time. Now he needed to pump up again. At that moment, the familiar sound of a bell was heard above his ear, and a window appeared before his eyes. After clicking on it, information was displayed that he had single-handedly destroyed the goblin hideout. Bonus points were 150%. Level C boss successfully destroyed. Also, the fact that he reached the 11th level and promotion to the 2nd rank became available to him. The second feature was unlocked. This made the guy rejoice and exclaim happily, clenching his hand into a fist. Many status window messages appeared before his eyes, which Kong Wu looked at with interest. It described a special ability of the 2nd rank. Rank 2 special ability. Irresistible feeling of hunger. Result: receiving more dark energy when using the Devour power. Kong Wu beamed, and he smiled. Not at all, because he received a high-class strength now. Whether low, high level, or class does not matter. The important thing is that the ability he received will help him accumulate dark energy many times faster. He said that in this case he needed to test the effectiveness of the new power. He put his hand over the hobgoblin's body, activating the devouring ability. A black mist instantly released from his hand and enveloped the body. The guy noticed that the smoke became thicker, but whether this was due to the new ability or not, he did not know. The moment Kong Wu drained almost all his energy, a window appeared before his eyes where it was written that triggering an irresistible feeling of hunger absorbs more dark energy. The guy noticed that the characteristic had increased by a certain percentage, and he concluded that from now on, it would be necessary to catch monsters of a higher level, since this was not an absolute value, but measured as a percentage. He decided that in this case, it might be worth a try. Kong Wu closed his eyes lightly, trying to feel how the new dark magic inside him felt. His face suddenly frowned. He thought that if there were more units, then the strength should have increased. At best, it could even double. However, it seems that it has increased as much as 3 times, but how could this happen? It was impossible to mindlessly rejoice at the sudden increase in strength. It could be very dangerous. Kong Wu returned to his seat and focused on his mind. Not even a couple of minutes had passed before he realized the reason for the sudden jump in power. The power that sealed Manhwa as weakening. However, he still could not understand why this was happening. He thought about it even when he opened his eyes. Kong Wu opened the main status window to see if anything else had changed other than the rank increase. He was curious whether with each promotion the power that sealed Manhwa would weaken. The guy smiled slyly. Kong Wu's gaze began to sparkle with new crazy colors. If this is really the case, then he would only need to reach a certain level, and the power would return in full. He stood up from the ground, thinking that he would need to visit a higher level gate. Kong Wu picked up a magic stone lying on the ground, and with a crazy smile, said that his goal to confirm the theory was to reach level 20 and get rank 3. After a while, Kong Wu and Hano were already sitting in the diner, gradually devouring the chicken on the plate. Kong Wu quickly ate the chicken with his gloved hands, having completely gnawed and set aside the bone. He reached for the beer, and then drank half a liter of beer in one gulp, and his body began to tremble. He said that it was delicious, and his head nodded in agreement that the taste was indeed delicious. Han Sol asked if it was really so tasty. The guy nodded with a smile and said that it was simply excellent. Han Sol narrowed her eyes at Kong Wu, who was eating chicken like crazy, and continued in a slightly offended voice, asking what he thought was even better than her kimchi chigai. The guy closed his eyes and thought. Uncertainty was visible in his behavior. Chicken and kimchi jjigae. You can't choose just one. After much doubt, Kong Wu said that if you had to choose between these 2 dishes, then her kimchi jjigae was better. The chicken may be delicious, but it can't beat his passionate love for kimchi jjigae. Han Sol replied with a chuckle that it was just a joke. He laughed back without answering. The girl, using tongs, transferred her chicken to his plate, offering him to eat it. The guy replied that this was the most valuable thing, but he accepted the treat. Satisfied with Han Sol's answer, his cheeks instantly turned red. She smiled imperceptibly, and then turned to Kong Wu, asking if he had friends or family. At this question, Kong Wu froze for a moment, and then silently took a sip of beer. With a loud knock, he placed the cup on the table, simultaneously throwing the fork off it. He answered that he had no friends, no family, no home. Meanwhile, the fork fell to the floor and began to swing. Finally paying attention to this, the guy leaned over to pick up the fork. Han Sol asked him where he was going to spend the night if he had no friends, no home, or even family. Kong Wu picked up his fork from the floor and laconically replied that he would spend the night somewhere. Ignoring the girl's gloomy face, he said that he didn't know how or what would happen, but he thought he would be okay. After listening to him, she attracted his attention by calling him by name and asked if he would mind staying at their house. The guy was taken aback by her proposal, and he asked in surprise whether they really didn't mind him staying with them. Han Sol, taking out a new fork, replied that they didn't mind. Then she handed it to him, saying that he had no idea how much he had helped them. Therefore, he need not worry about this. Kong Wu said that in that case, thank them for their help, and he took the fork from her hand, saying that he relied on her. The girl reciprocated his feelings. It was difficult for her to hide her interest in Kong Wu. She thought that it was quite possible that he had quite a lot of worries. The guy, meanwhile, seemed to remember something, nodded, and taking out an envelope from his bosom, put it on the table in front of Han Sol, saying that he would like to give it to her. There were about 3 million won inside. The girl looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he showed it to her and gave it to her. Noticing that she was hesitating, Kong Wu suggested that she think of it as paying rent. The girl replied that even so, she could not accept it. She explained that she could not do this because he had already helped them a lot. She can't take the money either. Han Sol owes him her life and cannot accept money from him under the pretext of paying for accommodation. The guy said that they had already spent a lot on him, and he understood that they lived modestly. So let her not think about anything and just take the money. Plus, he eats delicious food every day. Let him consider this. If not payment for housing, then at least money for food. He pushed the envelope towards Han Sol and left it there. She immediately thanked him and took the envelope. It seemed that the moment she accepted the envelope, she was ready to cry, and she continually thanked the guy, who only rejected her thanks. She was worried that this month would be very difficult, so the envelope Kong Wu offered could be compared to long-awaited rain during a drought. Then Han Sol, with a gentle smile, promised that after buying meat, she would prepare even richer kimchi jjigae tomorrow. It will taste even better. At the mention of kimchi jjigae, Kong Wu's eyes lit up. These were not just words, these were words that stirred consciousness. As expected, Han Sol is just an angel. Delicious kimchi. Every day, Kong Wu's consciousness drew a colorful flower garden, and among the flowers is Han Sol with snow-white wings and a clear smile. Next to her, flowers bloom here and there, and in her hands is kimchi jjigae. Suddenly remembering something, the guy asked if they had a D-level gate in the area. The girl, remembering their location, answered that there was only one, but there were lizard men there. Kong Wu thought that he should try to go tomorrow. He needs monsters to level up faster and preferably as strong as possible. Not only that, but it will also increase his income. He also wondered what lizard meat tastes like. The girl took him to one of the rooms, explaining that her brother had used it before. But now, for obvious reasons, it was his. Kong Wu thanked her, and said that only thanks to her could he finally sleep comfortably. She replied that she had done no such thing, and wishing him good night, she turned off the light. Kong Wu wished her good night in response, and with a smile, he waited until she closed the door and the room plunged into darkness. He stretched and finally fell back onto the soft bed. After 10,000 years, he was finally able to lie down on something soft. It's so quiet and comfortable there. He fell asleep thinking about how great it was to be back. There were many times more people in front of the level D gate than in front of the level E gate. This happened because after completing the initial training, players immediately received a level D certificate. But of course, for those who had just received rank 2, hunting in level D gates was not an easy task because they lacked fighting skills. That is why the level D gate is full of those who sell uniforms to newcomers. Somewhere out there, a guy was screaming at the top of his lungs, advertising himself to get into the party. Kong Wu looked at him with sympathy and walked in the opposite direction. He didn't have any intentions regarding this guy, and he certainly didn't intend to invite him along. Therefore, he quickly passed control and entered the gate, immediately passing through it. The scenery in this gate was not the same as in the E-level gate. Kong Wu immediately warmed up and stretched. Then, deciding that it would be best to move around without unnecessary noise, he activated the power of silence, a skill that can turn off the necessary sounds. He did this on the recommendation of Han Sol, turned off the sound of his steps, and went in search of monsters. Then he gradually began to move further and further from the portal, remembering everything that Han Sol had told him. She said that they have poor eyesight and are very sensitive to sounds. In terms of their body structure, they can be said to belong to the class of reptiles. If you stumble, a horde of lizards will immediately come running from all over the area. Kong Wu noticed several lizard men that were not far from him. There were 3 of them at once. Han Sol said that they are also afraid of fire. They say that parties of fire mages are best at hunting lizard men. The guy quietly approached, activating the power of the Hellfire, a power that belonged to the demon named Andras. Kong Wu pointed his hand towards the lizard men. The lizard man screamed loudly in pain and surprise. A small flame jumped onto the monsters, and as soon as it reached its target, it grew so large that it covered the lizard man's entire body, burning them one by one. He continued to watch Hellfire do its thing. Still, it cannot be extinguished by conventional methods. It can be repelled by dark energy or magic, but there are no other ways due to the fact that the flame burns life energy and not the body. After a while, they fell to the ground screaming, having lost all their life force. They had literally just been burning with Hellfire, but there was not a single burn on their bodies. A killed monster can always be consumed by devouring. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Kong Wu's head regarding Han. He also belongs to the Andras Guild. He heard this somewhere by accident, quite significant among the mid-tier guilds. The guild about which there were so many bad rumors suddenly coincided in name with the power that Kong Wu was currently using. But in any case, if he interferes with him or makes him angry, he will simply kill him. Kong Wu unleashed the Devour power on the bodies devoid of life force, holding them in his hands. While Kong Wu was doing this, a strange sound came from behind him. He turned around. There, among the trees, stood a huge number of monsters who looked at him with anger. One of them looked straight into his eyes, still growling. The guy just smiled back at him. With the help of the power of Hellfire, Kong Wu dealt with 3 or 4 lizard men at a time, so he specifically wanted to look for monsters that clustered in groups. At the same time, they growled loudly, unable to resist him. The guy thought that they were too noisy, which made them difficult to handle when there were a lot of them. Because of this, he decided to activate the power of silence. In fact, he didn't even have to hunt. It was so simple that Kong Wu doubted whether he was hunting at all. He used the same technique, and the result was the same. A notification popped up stating that his level had been increased by 1. Everything turned out as he thought. The higher the level, the more effort and time it takes to level up. Standing in the swamp in search of monsters, Kong Wu thought that this was still not enough. He was wondering whether he should organize a raid again when someone called out to him. The guy turned towards the voice. The man said that judging by his equipment, he was a beginner, and asked if he would like to join their guild and hunt with them. Kong Wu reluctantly asked what kind of guild they were. Behind him stood a guy covered in acne with 4 members of the group. He smiled and said that he was talking about the Andras Guild. A silver necklace glittered around his neck, confirming his belonging to this group. The guy looked at them indifferently for some time, and then he turned in the other direction and said that he was not interested in this. The guy who invited him to join silently watched him leave for a long time. And then, in a rude manner, he shouted that Kong Wu was an arrogant bastard who was still green and couldn't cope with them alone. The girl standing next to him asked what they should do and suggested what would happen if the master found out that they just let him go. He replied that if this was the case, they would simply take him away half dead. With a more gloomy tone, he continued that they could finally relieve stress and would teach him a very good life lesson. Kong Wu was still hunting monsters in the wilderness and swamp, burning everyone he found. They burned with a loud cry and then fell exhausted to the ground. The guy who was watching them slowly used the power of the Devour to suck the life force out of them. Exhaling, he thought that it looked like he had already killed all the monsters in the area, and there was no one left. It's good to be safe, but he thinks it would be better if it were hotter so he could level up faster. The guy stood in confusion, wondering what he should do. While Kong Wu was in doubt, a voice came from behind him. He turned around. He already knew this voice. It was the same pimply guy who just in case reminded him that he was a senior comrade. Then he said that they just came to see how he was doing and how he was hunting. Each of them looked at Kong Wu with a grin. Kong Wu smiled imperceptibly at such a blatant lie. Apparently, they liked to trample people into the dirt. The corners of Kong Wu's lips twitched, and he said in a calm tone that, as they saw, the hunt was going well. Hojun leaned towards Kong Wu and examined the area around him more closely. Then he said that even if so, he did not see a trace of corpses on his clothes. The phrase about a successful hunt did not fit with the absence of bodies of lizard men. Kong Wu shrugged and calmly replied that he was taking a break. The guy responded with a drawn-out "oh," and then asked if he was talking rudely to his elders. Kong Wu replied that he was infuriated by the fact that they were prying into his affairs. Hojun, looking at the calm Kong Wu, changed his face and uttered rude words. Kong Wu mockingly asked what it was and if they wanted to fight. Before this, the group members who had been standing calmly changed their faces and grabbed their weapons. Hojun put his hand towards his armed comrade and ordered them to stop. The guy who pulled out the weapon wanted to object, but he was told not to worry. "Don't worry, we will still re-educate this rude man," Hojun said with mockery. He didn't understand how this brute could even bluff if his ability was a maximum of B rank. But there was no need to get their hands dirty during re-education. There was a better way to do what every beginner fears. The guy ominously said that Kong Wu would regret his self-confidence. Kong Wu mockingly replied that he couldn't wait for this moment to come. Hojun, looking at the fearless Kong Wu, took out his dagger. He smiled contentedly and extended his hand forward with a metal wristband on it, saying that he would see how far Kong Wu would go. He hit the once with these things. The members of his group knew what Hojun was up to and watched with anticipation in their eyes. The guy asked if he knew that lizard men are sensitive to sounds. Kong Wu didn't answer. This is information that Kong Wu knew from the very beginning of the hunt. Kong Wu guessed what Hojin would do now and grinned a dagger, a metal wristband and sound-sensitive lizard men. If you combine all these facts together, there is only one option left. He ran the dagger across the wristband. The clear and melodic sound of metal echoed throughout the swamp. Wild screams were heard coming from a herd of lizard men heading towards them. Hojin ordered his teammates to prepare defensive magic, and then he laughed heartily, asking if Kong Wu was scared. After all, judging by the sound, more than 10 lizard men are rushing towards us. Don't you think this is too much for a lesson? Hojin sneered. Kong Wu remained silent, and Hojin continued to say that if Kong Wu asked nicely, they would help him before he became crippled. He asked if Kong Wu was silent only because he was afraid. Hearing him, Kong Wu raised the corners of his lips, and then smiled at Hojun's ridiculous act. He mockingly said that he thought Hojun would do something more, but apparently he was only capable of this. Kong Wu looked at Hojun's confused expression and concentrated the force in both hands, with the words that if Hojun was going to do something, he should do it right. Kong Wu activated the sound power and clapped his hands loudly. The power made it possible to make every movement so loud that you would want to go deaf just to not hear these sounds. Hojun and his comrades turned pale. It was pure suicide to make noise in the lizardmen's lair. Kong Wu continued to use the power of sound. It seemed as if bombs were exploding here and there. Hojin's cry for him to stop was mixed with the sounds made by Kong Wu's force. Even though Hojin acted like a crazy person, he wasn't the real crazy person here. Kong Wu stepped on one last time and then fell silent. Kong Wu slowly looked at their expressions and smiled mockingly, enjoying their situation. The pimply guy once again shouted that Kong Wu was just crazy, but the rest of his party didn't say a word. Their faces turned pale, and their thoughts became confused, going through all the possible options for getting out of the situation. Suddenly, eerie sounds were heard from all sides. The number of lizard men rushing towards them seemed to be close to 100. They were surrounded on all sides by lizard men. Escape was simply not possible. The girl said in fear that she had never seen so many lizard men, and the guy told her to come to her senses and said that everything would be fine and she needed to focus on the shield. Hojin prepared his dagger and angrily shouted at Kong Wu, asking if he was thinking about taking all of them to the grave with him. Kong Wu used the power of silence and took a few light steps. Despite the sticky, swampy terrain, his steps made absolutely no sound. The guy climbed a tree and mockingly asked if Hojin had said that lizard men were sensitive to sounds. He said that he already knew about it. Suddenly, the loud sounds made by the monsters became even louder and they rushed towards the dome. Hojun, who was watching this along with the others, knew that there was absolutely no way for a rank 2 player to survive while being attacked by so many lizard men. He again shouted Kong Wu's words, saying that he was a son of a Sorekurs, and asking if he had gone crazy for deciding to die altogether. Kong Wu, leaning on a nearby tree, watched Hojin's actions with a satisfied face. He asked what Hojin was babbling about and said that he didn't even think about dying. Only they would die. He again activated the power of silence and continued to watch them with a smile. Monsters even climbed from trees. They were everywhere and constantly fell on this particular dome. Hojin saw this and trembled. Hojin thought that Kong Wu had the power to completely control sounds. After all, before this, he made unrealistically loud sounds, but now he muffles his steps. It is not difficult to draw conclusions. Even the slightest hope disappeared. Now you could read hopelessness on Hojin's face. But he was distracted by a crowd of monsters approaching from all directions, and even that was not the main thing. A second later, he turned around, shouting heart-rendingly, asking where the shield had gone. To see how the girl holding it was pierced through by a spear. She hardly realized what had happened. So now she looked straight at him, living out her last moments of life. Seeing this, Hojin fell to the ground in fear and helplessness. Then he covered his mouth with both hands, trying not to scream. Turning his head, he saw in front of him the corpse of one of his friends, which was being chewed with gusto by a huge monster. This picture frightened him even more. He let out his last breath, unclenched his hand, and released the spear from it. From this sight, Hojin forcefully closed his eyes and mouth so much that he held his breath and did not breathe at all. After some time, Hojin sighed heart-rendingly, wiping the blood of the lizard men from his face. Hojin was horrified, looking towards Kong Wu, and began to ask for help and salvation. He begged him because if they didn't get a little help, the situation wouldn't change. The guy began to pronounce words syllable by syllable, and, showing his fist, wished Hojin good luck, not forgetting to smile sweetly. Hojin screamed heart-rendingly that Kong Wu was a brute. He didn't care. He had nothing left to lose. At that moment, one of the monster's spears pierced the heart of Hojun, who was standing absent-mindedly. The guy watched the monsters devour him. Now he had no thoughts of helping them. He was definitely not a kind person. More precisely, he survived due to the fact that he stopped being kind in a world where the main rule was anger for anger, murder for murder. To evil, he only responds with even greater evil and with the intention to kill. A bloody massacre. With these thoughts in mind, Kong Wu smiled madly. Several lizard men fell to the ground, engulfed in hellfire, tired of fighting with Hojun's group. They had no strength left to resist Kong Wu, so the monsters died one by one. Kong Wu only needed to keep the fire going. He exhaled and removed the fire from his hands, looking around the place where he was. A swamp covered with corpses. Even strong people could vomit at the sight of such a scene, but the guy did not pay attention to this. Thinking that he could proceed, he extended his hand, activating the power of the Devour. A black haze enveloped the dead bodies of the lizard men. A notification popped up stating that dark magic had been increased by 1. At that moment, another notification popped up, stating that he could not use the power of the Devourer on objects under the protection of the system. Kong Wu recalled that he had already seen something like this somewhere, and it was like that time. He noticed Hojun's body with his heart pierced by a spear among the pile of lizardmen bodies. He thought that it was probably because of these guys, since the players are protected by the system. It was a pity to hear this because he was curious if it was possible to extract characteristics from a player. Kong Wu glanced at Hojun's body without any regret. He thought that since it was possible to take away power from a demon, then there was a high probability that it could be taken away from a player. But it wasn't that important. He exhaled and smiled at his thoughts. Still, dark energy was more important to him. He walked around all the bodies with the exception of members of Hojun's party. A notification appeared indicating that his dark energy had reached 30. Kong Wu took a deep breath and felt the dark energy he received throughout his entire body. Compared to last time, dark energy had increased much more. Not only had its quantity increased, but also its quality. If you compare the hellfire he used a couple of hours ago to the fire that is burning now, the difference is obvious. The flame became stronger and larger. This meant that the quality of dark energy also increased. Now all he had to do was level up. Kong Wu, collecting the magic stones lying on the ground, nodded his head with satisfaction. Now that he has hunted a little before the 3rd rank, he will get it and find out whether the power that seals Manhwa really weakens as the rank increases. The guy calmly walked past Hojun's cold body, deciding for himself that he needed to pump up a little more. 3 days had passed since then. Kong Wu sat at the table and ate food straight from the pan with appetite. Having finished it, he praised the food with a smile, saying that it was very tasty. The girl thanked him for such a good assessment of her dish, and she asked if he was going to hunt today. Wiping his face, the guy replied that he was getting ready and thought that he would most likely return in the evening. The girl took the kettle and asked if he was overdoing it too much since he wasn't resting at all. Kong Wu calmly replied that everything was fine, and he asked when her training would end. Han Sol replied that in a few days. They were told that now they would go to goblins to level up. She doesn't know if she will be able to get a good feature, but she still wants to reach rank 2 as soon as possible. Kong Wu told her with a smile that she would succeed. The girl thanked him and handed him a cup, asking him to drink some tea before leaving. He hasn't rested for a long time, so she thinks he was very exhausted during this time. Kong Wu thanked her, thinking to himself that she was a true angel. The girl remembered something and told him that she was thinking about the gate, and asked if he might have already heard. The guy asked in surprise what he had heard. She replied that recently there have been a lot of rumors about team killers. Maybe these are just rumors, but still, he needs to be careful. A team killer is someone who fakes his level and attacks other players. Perhaps these rumors spread because of the Andress Guild. But he doubts it because he had no witnesses and he is sure of it. Just by looking at their bodies, one could say that they were killed by lizard men. If he is the rumored team killer, then he need not worry. But he also may not know this. Therefore, in order to be prepared for the unknown, he needs to increase his level as soon as possible. Notifications poured in that he had reached level 20. He could be promoted to rank 3, and a 3rd feature had been unlocked. The guy looked at them in surprise. Last time his magical power indicator increased, however. This time, everything is different. Kong Wu put his hand forward and, using the power of Andress, ignited the hellfire. The big fire gradually slid down from Kong Wu's palm. This is the former real flame from hell, thirsty for vitality, and he said that he knew so. Kongwu looked at the 2-meter-high fire with a satisfied smile, thinking that more and more dark energy is leaking through the weakened seal. He looked down at the ground and thought that maybe it was worth trying the magic stones, which lay in the bodies of monsters, which, however, never ceased to sparkle. He looked at the third feature, a demon craving magical power. Its action made it possible to transform magic stones into dark energy and absorb it. He looked down and thought that maybe it was worth trying the magic stones, which lay in the bodies of monsters which, however, never ceased to sparkle. Kongwu's eyes, having learned his new method of accumulating dark magic, began to shine. To his surprise, one stone contained as much dark energy as the bodies of monsters. The amount of dark magic that he could extract from one monster had increased, and to be more precise, it had doubled. Compared to overwhelming hunger, the power he gained when he was promoted to rank 2. The ability he now gained was more useful, but then, if he wants to use it, he will have to give up selling stones. But over the past few days, he had already earned enough money, and he didn't have to go to the exchanger at all for a while. Because he finished the hunt earlier than expected, he had a lot of free time. Besides, he would like to try out his new abilities. That's why he decided it was worth warming up a little. Kongwu sighed sadly, and he smoothly descended to the ground. He looked ahead calmly, and then Kongwu used the power of heaven and soared to the heights. Thanks to him being promoted to rank 3 and being able to use more dark magic, heaven's power didn't become too much to handle. He stopped on a branch of a tall tree and sat down a little for comfort. But no matter how hard he tried, nothing was visible because of the tangled branches of the trees. And the boss of the lizard men too, Kongwu hoped to find the boss from the air. But it turned out to be more difficult than he expected. He clicked his tongue in disappointment. He would like to absorb a higher-level magic stone. He thought bitterly that everything would be simpler if only he could use the power of the observer. At that moment, a familiar voice in the clear sound of metal reached Kongwu. It was the voice of Taisu, who had just recently gathered a party in front of the entrance to the gate. His voice was filled with anger, and he spoke faster than usual. Kongwu saw 2 guys surrounding Taisu, who said that he not only looked strong, but that his face also matched everything else. They didn't think he would be so persistent. Kongwu didn't really understand what was happening there, but it was definitely not normal. Next to Taisu lay the bleeding rogue with whom they had communicated at the gate. Meanwhile, Taisu shouted loudly, asking the guys why they were attacking members of their own party. They asked, displeased, why he was so loud and told him to be quiet because soon all the lizard men would come running to them. Taisu shouted at them to answer the question, putting up a shield in front of him. Listening to Taisu's dialogue with his comrades, Kongwu squinted. Even after hearing only a fragment of the conversation, it was not difficult to understand what was happening. They were betrayed. Those 2 guys were in Taisu's party and then suddenly attacked their teammates. It looks like they were the team killers from the rumors. Apparently, they snuck into the gate disguised as members of a group, but their goal was not to kill monsters but to kill their own teammates in order to take away their valuables and uniforms. One of the guys shouted at Taisu to shut up and stand still and then attacked him. Taisu immediately repelled his attack with his shield, but due to the force of the impact, he still flew several meters back and slowed down. Gritting his teeth, he continued to stare at the guys. One of the guys remarked that Taisu was truly indestructible, and the second one asked why he held up so well if he only had the 2nd rank. Taisu, without letting go of his shield, gripped the handle tighter. With loud words that his soul, unlike theirs, was not corrupt, he forcefully stuck the shield into the ground. Gritting his teeth, he concentrated all his strength on his shield arm, and the shield lit up with a yellowish tint. The guy finished speaking with the words that he would no longer tolerate this. The guys began to approach him, saying that he might have activated some powerful ability, but if he has not reached rank 3, he will not be able to defeat them.